Hi, I'm Grady Collane in the CapeCod.com News Center, joined today by Mark Forrest, Barnstable County Commissioner. We just wrapped up our general election, and President Donald Trump is going to be getting his second term in office. However, that has kind of brought into question how some local projects might go along, including our major bridge replacement effort for the Bourne and Sagamore Bridge. The Bourne Bridge has not yet been fully funded yet. Sagamore has, but the Bourne Bridge hasn't. And also how offshore wind development is going to go forward. He has been kind of opposed to the offshore wind sector for a while, and the most recent bid for just off the Outer Cape, about 30 miles away from Eastham, my hometown, it went to bid, and Avangrid and Invenergy from Chicago bought half of the bids. They bought 4 out of 8, but it was at the minimum possible bid. It just seemed like a very cold reception, and some people brought up that it was maybe because there was apprehension with the upcoming election. Now the election's passed. But yeah, can you comment about how that might play out with some of these local initiatives?
Well, I think we're all going to be looking very closely at how the Trump administration sort of lays out its priorities. And our first opportunity to get a better insight, obviously, is when they announce their appointments and some of the new faces that will be coming into the new administration. And then in February, they'll be announcing a budget and laying out funding for a variety of programs and services, and that'll give us another indication. With respect to the bridges, let's sort of start there. We've benefited significantly from initiatives that have come from the Biden administration and strongly supported by the Massachusetts congressional delegation, initiatives that have provided funding for major transportation infrastructure projects. And obviously the funding for the Sagamore Bridge, we were able to secure that from some of these initiatives. Now the question is going to be, as we get to the Bourne Bridge, will the federal government continue to support these programs to the level and to the extent that they have been supported, during the Biden administration? We're going to have a new Congress. The Senate is going to change. The House will probably stay Republican. We don't know, but we'll see. But it could very well affect the spending priorities. And if indeed there are cuts in some of these programs, then the challenge will be in terms of getting funding for the Bourne Bridge, because the funding, as we've seen, there's no sort of mega funding appropriation for these projects. They require, appropriations or grant awards of a significant amount, but we need to sort of piece them together in order to get the funding that's needed. The Bourne and the Sagamore Bridge were clearly priorities of Governor Healy in this administration. They have been priorities of the Biden-Harris administration. Whether or not they continue to be priorities of the incoming administration is definitely a question. I think you'll see an aggressive effort to try to urge them to continue the funding for these kinds of initiatives. And I think there'll be obviously aggressive advocacy for funding for the Bourne Bridge. But I think the fundamental question is going to be, is the administration going to support the programs that fund these kinds of projects? And will the Congress be in a position to deliver on the funding? Because it's a little bit unclear what those priorities will be. So for people to be nervous about the funding on the Bourne Bridge, I think that's a very legitimate and understandable area of concern. We're just going to have to see. We'll know soon enough. Now, as you may have heard, the funding that was sought by the Commonwealth and for the Bourne Bridge, those two applications did not win support and were not successful. The goal has been to apply for the next round. There's another round of funding coming up in about 6 months, and that's been the game plan all along, has been to keep applying in each round until we get successful and are able to deal with whatever deficiencies or issues might have been identified in the prior rounds. In this case, the challenge that we had with the last round of funding is that in the applications that were submitted, we had projections of funds coming from the federal government to match some of the federal funding being sought in the grant awards. And, our hope is that if the next round is indeed launched and we're in a position where we can apply for it, we'll be able to address those deficiencies by having much more definition of the federal highway aid that is coming to Massachusetts that we can indeed match. So the big question is going to be, will there be another round in 6 months? Because that's when, we'll be having a new administration. They may decide not to continue the programs and continue the funding. They may decide to maybe hold off on doing that until, they get a new administration up and running. All I know is that there are going to be changes, and based on at least what we've heard so far, it's not entirely encouraging. But like I said, I think there'll be an effort really to lobby hard to see if there's a way to continue these programs. And, we've got projects that are very competitive. And so, from our point of view, if we can convince the Congress and the administration to keep some of these programs in place at the levels that are necessary to meet the needs in the country, then I think we stand a good chance. On the other hand, and once you keep in mind that, the first Trump administration was incredibly supportive of infrastructure funding. And for a variety of reasons, those initiatives didn't come to pass. So I think there will be a renewed attempt to try to convince the incoming administration to continue some of this work. And if the priority is jobs and the economy and keeping people working, then I think there's generally in the past been bipartisan support to sustain these initiatives. So, sometimes in the heat of a campaign, it's a little bit unclear whether or not a program like this, might continue. But we'll know soon enough, and we'll know clearly how that shapes up. With respect to wind energy, that's another complicated area. Many of these leases and sales have already been initiated. Whether or not there'll be future sales, I think is uncertain. I think the big concern that we've seen on Cape Cod is sure, it's certainly the wind farms themselves and some of the problems with the blades and the oversight of the projects and making sure that they're done correctly. Clearly, there are issues there. There are oversight issues and problems. The other big issue has been transmission. The federal government and the state government needs to do a better job of finding ways to sort of collect transmission and deliver it directly to the load centers rather than, overwhelming the Cape with individual transmission lines. That's been a problem. And quite frankly, in the past, the Department of Energy has even cited it as a problem. And there have been recommendations from other groups, other federal and state agencies, recommending that the transmission be collected offshore and delivered to urban areas where the load is, and avoiding bringing transmission, in places like Cape Cod. That certainly, is important work that needs to continue. Now, whether that will continue with the new administration is a very good question. But that's another thing that we'll be looking at closely. So I can assure you that we will, be looking at the initiatives of the new administration to see where there might be opportunities for us to collaborate and work together, in where there may be potential losses in funding and support, where we're going to have to come up with, alternative approaches and initiatives to help carry out those initiatives. So, we're going to be busy really sizing up what's going to happen and how it will affect the Cape. And so these are just some of the initial thoughts and some of the initial projections. But, as things progress, or as we get further into a new administration, we'll be in a much better position to assess how their initiatives may help or hurt us. And we'll be developing our game plans accordingly based on what they decide.
All right, awesome. I assume a lot of meetings with Paul Niedzwiecki, Cape Cod Chamber of Commerce, and a couple of other major players for the local business sector here on Cape Cod in the coming months, definitely.
Well, I think there are going to be a number of groups looking at what's going on. Obviously, having worked in Washington for many years, there's a process that's underway that we need to, be cognizant of and pay close attention to. And, we'll certainly be sharing what we learn with as many groups as we can that have an interest in this as well. We definitely want to work with the chamber and a host of other civic groups to help them, become advocates. I think what has helped us in the past is having a fairly broad-based group of municipal officials, business leaders, civic leaders that have weighed in support of the Cape's priorities. It's always helpful that when you get basically elected officials and the leadership of a particular region all speaking with one voice on the urgency and the importance of tackling a particular issue, that is incredibly helpful. And that's something that we all work to strive to do, and that is to speak with one voice on the pressing issues of the day. We've certainly done that, over the past few years with respect to the funding for the Canal bridges. We've done that with respect to funds for wastewater. We've done that for, on the issue of the machine gun range out on the Upper Cape Water Supply Reserve. I mean, there's been a host of issues where we've come together and have spoken loudly and clearly, on behalf of the Cape. And I think that's one of the reasons why, when I said before that, many of the issues transcend party or ideology. The Cape's issues and the Cape's agenda is very much a nonpartisan one, and we all work together as best we can to help the Cape and advance its agenda and to protect its environment, to protect the Cape's economy, and we work very well together.
All right, awesome, Mark. Thank you very much for joining me for this conversation. Anything else that you wanted to add about possible future infrastructure projects? Or I know you guys have been working on digital equity. I don't think that is something that has been factored into like the national races as much, but is that still moving apace for you guys?
Well, the federal government has sort of baked into a number of programs fairly steady stream of funding to help states and municipalities expand broadband access, and that's difficult. It's going to be difficult to strip those funds away. I think there's a pretty broad consensus that those programs should continue. But again, that's one of the areas that we'll be looking at to see if there are any changes that are on the way, and if indeed there are, how to adapt.